Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe if you want more updates on true crime stories. Thank you. It's May 19th, 1977. The sun is high over Eugene, Oregon. Colleen Stan, a blue-eyed, brown-haired college dropout, throws her duffel bag into the back seat of a friend's car and gives a wave goodbye. She's hitchhiking to a birthday party in Northern California, 600 miles south. Her friends warned her, it's risky, but Colleen was confident that she'd done it before. What are the odds, right? She was smart about it. She turned down 2 sketchy rides. And then, she saw a car that made her heart relax. A blue Dodge Colt. A young couple in the front seat with a baby in the back. Harmless and even sweet. Colleen smiled, and she got in. The couple introduced themselves, Cameron and Janice Hooker. Polite. Reserved. Cameron was tall and quiet. Janice was soft-spoken and nursing their baby. They made small talk and Janice offered Colleen juice. But as the miles ticked by, something began to feel off. Cameron didn't speak. Janice looked like she was performing calm. Then Colleen noticed the odd box in the back seat, wedged behind the baby carrier. It was wooden, metal-latched, with strange holes drilled into the side. Cameron caught her looking and smiled slightly but said nothing. Then, without warning, he pulled off the highway onto a remote dirt road near Red Bluff, California. Colleen's stomach dropped, but she didn't run. Not yet. Cameron got out and opened the trunk. He asked Colleen to step out. "You okay?" she asked Janice. Janice looked down silently. Colleen stood still. The trees were too thick to see the road, any cars, or get help. Then Cameron pulled something out of the trunk, a custom-built box. About the size of a small microwave. He walked up to Colleen, slowly, and before she could scream. He shoved it over her head and it locked at the shoulders. Colleen's world disappeared. When she woke, she was naked. Her wrists chained and ankles bound. She couldn't scream and couldn't see. She was in a basement which later, she would learn that it belonged to the Hookers. This was just the beginning. Cameron had a name for what he was creating. The Project. He wasn't just a sadist but had a vision. A sex slave, kept permanently. No name. No rights. No hope. Janice helped him. Not out of fear, but out of loyalty. She had been his first victim, and now she'd become his accomplice. Colleen would later describe that first week in chains as being buried alive. But the worst was yet to come. 1 month in, Colleen had been beaten, starved, hung by her wrists, and electroshocked. Then Cameron did something unexpected. He handed her a piece of paper. It was a slave contract, 8 pages long. It said she now belonged to a secret organization called the Company. If she disobeyed, the company would kill her family. Blow up her house. Cut her into pieces. It was fake, of course, but Colleen didn't know that. Cameron and Janice faked letters, fake news reports, and even phone calls from agents. Colleen was terrified into submission. She signed and became K, her new name. Not Colleen. Just K. Now that she was officially his, Cameron upgraded her prison. He built a coffin-sized box. Lined with carpet to muffle screams and with just enough space to move her fingers. He placed it beneath their waterbed. For 23 hours a day, Colleen lay in total darkness. In silence. In her own waste. Cameron would open the box once a day to feed, torture, and train her. One time, she made a noise, so he left her in there for 3 days straight. She nearly died. But she learned, silence was survival. People visited the house, a plumber, Janice's mother, and neighbors, but no one knew. No one suspected. One day, Cameron brought Colleen out to clean the kitchen naked, while a guest was in the next room. She said nothing. Did nothing. Because the company was always watching. Colleen's family hadn't heard from her in months. They assumed she was traveling, maybe joined a cult. Meanwhile, she was literally in a box, in the same house, with a crying baby upstairs. Janice was more than a bystander. She cooked for Colleen and washed her. She also helped Cameron torture her. But she also sometimes cried because Janice had once been in that box too. Cameron had freed Janice from her own abuse, by replacing her with Colleen. A cycle of trauma, weaponized. Sometimes, Janice would whisper apologies but never offer escape. Janice was prisoner in guard, wrapped in guilt, jealousy, and trauma. One day, in 1981, for years after her kidnapping, Cameron gave Colleen a gift. He let her visit her family. She dressed conservatively, smiled and told them she'd joined a religious community and was happy. She said nothing about being held captive. Why? Because the company would kill them all. Her parents believed her. Took pictures and hugged her, then wished her well. She returned willingly with Cameron. They had no idea she was being kept in a box under a bed. By 1983, Colleen had spent 6 years in captivity. She had no freedom. No privacy. No identity. And yet, something was changing. Janice was starting to question everything. She watched her husband grow more violent, more unstable, and she began to wonder. Could Colleen be saved? But Cameron had a new plan. He wanted another girl. Colleen would train her, just like Janice trained Colleen. And that would be the beginning of the end. Cameron Hooker wasn't impulsive. He was deliberate. A planner. An engineer, not by profession, but by obsession. He built devices, restraints, pulleys, and soundproof chambers. He drew blueprints. Sketched fantasies. This was no casual act of violence. He was creating something permanent, and Colleen was his prototype. By now, she had become K. No name, no voice, and no rights. Every time she made noise, disobeyed, or cried, there were consequences. Colleen learned to disappear, inside her own mind. The box Cameron designed was a masterclass in silent torture. 6 feet long. 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall. Lined with carpet and insulation foam. Equipped with chains at the corners. A small vent hole to prevent death, but not discomfort. Inside, Colleen could barely move. She couldn't turn. Couldn't lift her head. Couldn't breathe deeply. And for 23 hours a day, she was in it. Cameron kept it under his and Janice's waterbed. Above her, just inches away, was his sleeping body. The symbolism was cruel. She was beneath him, literally and psychologically. Each day had a routine. At 9 a.m., the box lid opened. A leash. A bowl of cereal. A bucket to use as a toilet. Then, an hour of labor, washing dishes, cleaning floors, folding laundry, naked, and silent. At 10 a.m., back in the box. Lid is closed and darkness resumes. For years, this was her life. On birthdays, she wasn't acknowledged. On holidays, she heard laughter above her head, while she trembled in shadows. Seasons changed. Presidents changed. But inside the box, time was frozen. The only thing more powerful than the physical prison was the psychological one. Cameron invented an organization, the company. They were everywhere, he said. Watching every move. Reading every letter. They would punish her. Kill her family and destroy anyone she loved, if she tried to escape. He forged fake memos, fake documents, even staged calls from agents. Colleen believed every word because fear, when nurtured correctly, becomes faith. And she had become a devout believer in a lie. Above the box, life went on. Janice took care of their children. Friends came to visit. A plumber repaired the pipes. A neighbor borrowed sugar. No one knew that beneath the waterbed, a girl was silently screaming. Sometimes the baby cried. Sometimes the radio played. Colleen, folded, aching, half-starved, waited but not to be rescued. Just to breathe. There were days when Cameron didn't come. Days when the box stayed shut. Food didn't arrive. Waste piled beneath her. She called those days blackouts. Not just for the darkness, but because her mind had to turn off. Shut down. Hibernate. Then he'd return, with a new device, a new game. Sometimes he made her kneel on rice. Sometimes he used electric shock. One time, he held her underwater until she lost consciousness, then revived her and told her she was lucky. Janice was no longer just a bystander. She watched her husband change, become colder, more erratic. He stopped touching her. Started calling Colleen my slave openly. At first, Janice tolerated it. After all, she had been the original, but now, she was just a wife in name. Janice began reading the Bible, praying and asking if this was what God wanted. Because something inside her, the small voice of guilt, was growing louder. By the 5th year, Colleen had changed. She smiled when spoken to. Thanked Cameron for meals. She even asked, once, if she could marry him, not because she loved him but because she thought it might earn her more freedom. Was it Stockholm Syndrome? Or strategy? Experts would debate this for decades. But Colleen wasn't broken, not fully, she was adapting like water in a pipe. She hadn't given up. She was surviving. In 1981, Cameron did something unthinkable. He let Colleen visit her family. He dressed her modestly. Told her what to say. Rehearsed her story. "You've joined a religious group," he said. "You love your life." She nodded. And for one weekend, Colleen was free. She hugged her mother. Ate real food. Laughed, though her voice shook, but she didn't tell them the truth, not even a whisper. Because she believed it would get them all killed. They took pictures, smiling ones. None of them knew it might be the last time they'd ever see her alive. Cameron's fantasies were evolving. One wasn't enough. He wanted another girl. A sister for Colleen. She would help him train the next one. Colleen said nothing, but inside, her heart cracked. Another girl might not survive what she did. Janice saw it too, and for the first time, she started to question everything. In 1983, after 6.5 years of silence, fear, and boxes, Janice broke. She sat down with a pastor and told him everything. He was stunned. He told her it was evil and she should run. For the first time, Janice didn't obey Cameron. She told Colleen the truth. The company isn't real. Colleen froze. The chains in her mind began to rattle. For the first time, hope wasn't just a word. It was a key. That day, Colleen left. Just left. Cameron let her walk out the door. Why? Because she had been so brainwashed, he didn't think she ever would. But she got on a bus, called her mother and told her everything. Then, she called the police. Police stormed the house. They found the box. The shackles. The diaries. The contracts. They found Janice, crying, broken, but finally willing to testify. And they found Cameron Hooker, who denied everything. But the evidence spoke louder. Colleen returned home, to a world that hadn't changed, but she had. Her mother hugged her like she was still 20, the girl who had hitchhiked, with a smile, but that girl was gone. Colleen barely spoke. She flinched at loud sounds. She cried when the door shut too quickly. And worse, she felt guilty. Guilty for surviving. Guilty for not escaping sooner. Guilty for almost missing Cameron. It didn't make sense, but trauma doesn't need to make sense. It just needs space to breathe. Janice Hooker went to the police. She told them everything. The abduction. The box. The abuse. But she made a deal. In exchange for immunity, she would testify against her husband. Detectives didn't hesitate. They arrested Cameron Hooker. But there was a problem. Colleen had lived with him, worked beside him, visited family, even returned voluntarily after her visit home. To some, it didn't look like captivity, but it looked like consent. Cameron's attorney painted him as a kinky oddball. Eccentric, but not evil. He showed photos of Colleen smiling, holding babies, and wearing dresses. He claimed she was a willing participant in BDSM. A consenting adult in an unusual relationship. But the truth was sicker than fiction. Colleen had lived under threat of a shadow organization. A puppet to a puppet master. But how do you prove psychological chains? How do you convict a man when the bruises are gone, but the mind is bleeding? Prosecutors knew the key wasn't just what Cameron did, but how he made her believe. So they introduced the company. They showed forged documents, fake IDs, voice recordings that Cameron made to scare her. They read from the slave contract, signed under duress. They brought in experts, psychologists, trauma specialists, who explained how prolonged abuse rewires the brain. One testified, Colleen was trained like a lab rat. Rewarded, punished, and conditioned. She wasn't a woman but she was a hostage. And the jury began to shift. When Colleen took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. She was soft-spoken. Precise. Painfully polite. She described the box. The darkness. The punishments. The control. She explained how she believed leaving would result in death, not just hers, but her family's. She looked directly at Cameron, once. Then she looked away. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But the silence between her words spoke louder than any scream. Cameron didn't testify. He sat motionless, expressionless. His eyes scanned the room, but never landed long enough to mean anything. To some, he looked like a man caught in a misunderstanding. To others, he looked like a predator finally cornered. The jury deliberated for less than a day. They found Cameron Hooker guilty of kidnapping, sexual assault, false imprisonment, and using a deadly weapon in the commission of a felony. The sentence? 104 years. He showed no reaction. But in the gallery, someone exhaled. Colleen. It was a relief. Not exactly. It was the first breath of a life she had forgotten how to live. The media called it the most bizarre kidnapping case in American history. Newspapers dubbed her the girl in the box. Talk shows debated the psychology. Survivors wrote in and sharing stories of their own invisible chains. But not everyone believed her. She could have left. She went home. She stayed. And to every critic, Colleen said only this. You weren't in the box. Colleen changed her name. Moved towns and tried to rebuild, but trauma doesn't vanish, it waits. She had trouble sleeping. Trusted no one. Couldn't stand enclosed spaces. She didn't go to therapy, not at first. She thought surviving was enough. But survival isn't healing. So one day, she walked into a church basement. A support group, and told her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor, and for the first time, it helped. Years passed. Colleen got a job helping domestic violence victims. She mentored girls who'd run from abuse. She spoke at colleges, quietly and powerfully. She never showed photos. Never dramatized her trauma. But when she spoke, people listened. Because the girl in the box had found her voice, and she used it. The story became folklore. Books were written. Documentaries made. Criminal profilers used it as a case study. Even Hollywood took interest, but Colleen refused to be fictionalized. She didn't want drama. She wanted change. And slowly, it happened. Laws on coercive control began to shift. Judges started allowing psychological abuse as evidence. Somewhere, a girl locked in silence saw her story, and realized she wasn't alone. Cameron Hooker filed for parole, twice. He claimed he was reformed. That he'd found God. That he had remorse. But each time, the board denied him. Because the box still existed. The evidence still stood. And the trauma hadn't expired. Some scars don't fade, they echo. Colleen once described a dream. She's standing in a room. No doors. No windows. No box. But she can't breathe. Because sometimes, the walls aren't physical but they're memories. And sometimes, they follow you. But still, she wakes up. And still, she breathes. A paper verdict. Cameron Hooker, 104 years in prison, justice served. The newspapers ran headlines. Captive victim wins freedom. Monster in the cellar. Girl in the box escapes hell. But the fine print told a different story. Colleen had to testify again, against a system that barely believed her the first time. Defense attorneys filed appeals, citing inconsistencies in her behavior. She went home. She smiled in pictures. She never tried to run. It didn't matter that her mind had been a prison. They wanted walls. They wanted bruises. And so, the legal battle lingered like smoke after a fire. Colleen couldn't sleep in beds. She couldn't stand closets. She kept lights on. Doors open. Shoes by the door, just in case. Some nights, she'd wake up sweating, convinced she was back in the box. It didn't take chains to bring her there, just a sound. A smell. A memory. Her therapist called it complex PTSD. But labels didn't help when the night dragged on and her breath wouldn't steady. Freedom came with a cost. And no one was paying it but her. The media kept calling. TV shows, book deals, and interviews. They wanted the horror, the box, the chains, the tears. But Colleen didn't want to be a headline. She wanted to be human. She gave one interview, just one. CBS News, 1984. She sat calmly, hands folded, and voice steady. "I survived," she said. "That's what matters." But the camera lingered on her face, waiting for emotion that didn't come. They didn't understand that her strength wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was in her silence. Janice Hooker disappeared from public view. Her deal had granted her immunity, but not forgiveness. She tried to rebuild her life. Joined a church, and changed her name. Some called her a victim too. Others said she was worse than Cameron. After all, she'd known. She'd watched. She'd said nothing. But eventually, she wrote Colleen a letter. One sentence stood out. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know, I finally chose good." Colleen never replied. Some wounds are better left closed. In 1985, a rumor spread. Another girl had gone missing. Same town. Same highway. Same mow. Panic resurfaced like a long-buried corpse. But it wasn't Cameron. He was behind bars. Still, the fear spread. Women avoided hitchhiking. Pepper spray sales spiked. And Colleen was flooded with letters. Some were from survivors. Some from strangers. Some from predators. One read. "You were lucky. He let you live." She threw that one away, but the chill stayed for days. Hollywood called again. Scripts, dramatizations, actors with pretty faces pretending to scream. They wanted to turn her horror into entertainment, but she declined. She didn't want to be consumed. She didn't want the box rebuilt on a soundstage, but they made movies anyway, fictionalized and sanitized. Each time, she felt the story slip further from her hands. Colleen tried dating, tried working, tried smiling in the mirror, but something always lingered. Sometimes, it was guilt. Sometimes, it was fear, and sometimes, it was nothing. A numbness. A floating detachment from life. She was alive, but not quite living. Friends didn't understand. They thought trauma ended when the trial did. But silence has a way of echoing through the years. Her birthday came. The first one where she wasn't in the box. She didn't celebrate. She sat on the floor, back against the wall and legs pulled tight. Just breathing. That was the party. Later, she wrote in her journal. Freedom tastes like stale air. But it's still air. And I'll take it. In 1993, Colleen got a letter from the prison from Cameron Hooker. It was polite, formal and almost casual. I hope you're doing well. She didn't read the rest but burned it. Then she locked her mailbox for good. Colleen spoke again, this time at a college lecture for criminal psychology majors. She told the facts, the timelines and the patterns. And then she paused and said, I wasn't just in a box, I became a box. Silent, contained and sealed off from the world. But now, she was unlocking and the students clapped. Not because she cried but because she didn't. The more she spoke, the more survivors found her. Women who had been groomed. Teens who had been silenced. Men who never told anyone. They didn't need advice. They just needed to know someone else had made it out, and Colleen had barely but enough. In 2002, Cameron filed an appeal. He wanted his sentence reduced. He claimed his behavior had changed and that he was a model inmate. Colleen didn't attend the hearing, but she sent a letter. It read, No wall is thick enough. No time is long enough. Because the damage wasn't just to my body, it was to my time, my soul. My now. The appeal was denied. By 2009, Colleen began to laugh again, not performatively, not for anyone else. Just laugh, at jokes, at TV shows, at life's little absurdities. She adopted a dog and took walks at sunset. She even drove the highway where she was taken, not to tempt fate, but to reclaim it. Colleen Stan didn't write a memoir. She didn't tour TV shows. She didn't chase the spotlight, but she went quiet. For years, the world moved on. New crimes. New headlines. New horrors. But Colleen was still waking up in a world where time didn't make sense. 6 years in a box had stolen something from her, something subtle. Her concept of safety, of space, and of normal. She once told a therapist, every room I enter, I scan for exits. Every man I meet, I measure their hands. Despite her silence, the world didn't forget. Survivors began citing her case in court. Advocates used her name in domestic violence campaigns. Psychologists studied the conditioning she endured, calling it compliance trauma. And slowly, laws began to shift. California introduced stricter sentences for coercive imprisonment. Federal debates opened about psychological manipulation as a form of assault. Her story, though nearly invisible, had left fingerprints on policy. Cameron Hooker remained behind bars, and over the decades, he changed prisons. He taught GED classes, attended Bible studies, and maintained good behavior, but every few years, he resurfaced, with parole requests. Each time, the letters flooded in from survivors. From advocates. And from average Americans who had read the story, seen the documentary, or simply never forgotten. They said, no second chances for monsters who wore masks. Parole was denied. Again. And again. Colleen never married. Although she had relationships, brief, cautious. Trust didn't come easy. Intimacy felt more like performance than connection. But she had friends, a community, and a dog named Jasper who never left her side. She worked as a counselor for abused women, quietly, without fame, and she found a kind of peace. Not the kind you imagine with sunsets and soft music, but the kind that grows from choosing life every day. In the early 2000s, true crime exploded with Netflix specials, podcasts, and YouTube channels. The Girl in the Box became legend, ranked among the most terrifying survival stories of all time. But something shifted as more creators began treating the story with care and nuance. Documentaries like the Poughkeepsie tapes and the disappearance of Maura Murray referenced psychological captivity, and Colleen's story became a case study in survival, not spectacle. In 2016, a new generation discovered her on Reddit. The story went viral again. And with it, the questions. How could she stay? Why didn't she run? Could this happen again? In 2020, on the 42nd anniversary of her escape, Colleen gave an interview. Just her voice. No cameras. She said, "I'm not angry. I'm not broken. But I'll never be the same, and I don't want to be." She talked about control. About how small freedoms become chains when fear is the lock. And then she said something that stopped listeners cold. "I forgave him. Not for him, but for herself." Colleen visited the old house once. The basement was gone. Renovated. Erased. But she stood in the backyard. Closed her eyes. And remembered the girl who used to beg the wind to move the grass, because it was the only thing she could see through the slats. She knelt down, touched the soil, and whispered, "I'm still here." Not a prayer but a promise. Colleen's story began with a mistake, a simple hitchhike gone wrong, but it ended with a movement. Today, her case is used to teach police recruits about coercion. It's cited in seminars about trauma bonding. It's a required reading in criminal justice programs. And for survivors across the globe, it's a lighthouse. Proof that you can be trapped, broken, silenced, and still crawl back to the light. In 2022, Cameron Hooker filed what may be his last parole request. He claimed he was reformed. That he'd found religion. That he was no longer a threat. Colleen didn't attend, but the room was filled with people who had once been strangers, now advocates, allies, survivors. They read statements. Held signs. One simply said, "We remember the box. Parole denied. Indefinitely." Colleen is now in her 60s. She walks 3 miles every morning. Talks to young girls at shelters. Watches the sun rise without looking over her shoulder. She lives in a quiet town. No headlines. No documentaries. No boxes. Just breath. Just peace. There's no twist. No final monster reveal. No hidden file in a box. Just a woman who lived through hell and came back holding the torch for others. You may never see her face in the media again. But her story will echo through every courtroom that listens to silence. Every victim who hesitates to speak. Every survivor who wonders if healing is possible. Because Colleen Stan didn't just escape. But she outlived the darkness. Would you have survived? What would you have done in Colleen's place? Tell us in the comments. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe if you want more updates on true crime stories. Thank you.